And the hand of the Lord was with them. In today's epistle reading, being from the Acts of the Apostles rather, we are given a picture of the early church, an aspect of the early church's life, as we have for the last few weeks. Between Easter and Pentecost, we get this image, this microcosm, this narrative of the early apostolic church and the different issues they faced, the problems they faced, but also some of the great blessings that came from their common life together. It is still very early. It is still the mid-30s of the 1st century AD. And after the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ, the first Christian to be executed for believing in Jesus Christ was a person called Stephen, the first martyr. We speak about Saint Stephen on his memory day, which is December the 28th. And I won't give you details now, but what is important and how it lines up here is that after the events of the martyrdom of Stephen, what we have is many Christians leaving Jerusalem. They're thinking, well, they executed Stephen, and his manner of death was basically a lynching. He got stoned. People stood in a circle and put him in the middle, and he was stoned to death. And many people, arguably with families and children, would have thought, this is not for us, we're going to move. We still want to be Christians, but we're going to move away from Jerusalem. And so the Acts of the Apostles, the book, tells us that many Christians ended up going to faraway places. If you look at the map, not too far away, but considering that there were no means of transport back then, you had to walk there. They went to Phoenicia, modern-day Lebanon, Cyprus, and Antioch. Antioch being the capital of Syria at the time, not Damascus. And the passage tells us that the first group that went there would preach the Christian message only to Jews. And we've had this theme for the last 3 weeks where there's this tension, this tug of war between those who were considering themselves Jews believing in the Messiah, Jesus Christ, and those who felt that this message is not just for Jews, but it's for all nations and for all people of all backgrounds. And we get quite an interesting insight into how and what happened today as well, in today's reading. So the first group was preaching only to Jews. Then there were a number of Christians who were from Cyprus and Cyrene, arguably Hellenized Jews, probably Hellenized Jews, Jews who had been Hellenized, became Greek in culture. They would speak Greek, they weren't speaking Hebrew, and this was as a result of Alexander the Great's conquests. This is already 300 years into the Greek presence in the Eastern Mediterranean. And there were Greek-speaking Jews from Cyprus and Cyrene, which were as Greek as, in terms of land. Cyrene is in Libya, very Greek area at that stage. who believed that Jesus Christ was the Messiah, and they had moved to Antioch prior to these events. So when they learnt of Jesus Christ and they believed that this was definitely the Messiah, they only spoke Greek, and so they would share the message, the gospel, to fellow Hellenist Jews, Hellenistas Iudeus, Greek-speaking Jews of Antioch. And then, as we see from subsequent history of the early church, you then get the message through the Greek-speaking Jews entering the Greek world proper, and you have Greeks of, as in Greek background, nothing to do with the Jews, believing in Jesus Christ and moving from a belief in the Olympian gods like Zeus, Hera, Aphrodite, Ares, and so on, not going through Judaism, but going straight to Christianity. A couple of the famous names of that early era who were Greeks from Greece were Justin, the philosopher, the author of the letter to Diognetus, which I will read a passage from that letter today so you can see the consistency in the message, in the 2nd century AD. Clement of Alexandria, Irenaeus of Lyon. He was a Greek from Greece who ended up in Lyon in Gaul, today France. These were all Greek people who went from paganism to Christianity. And it is not lost on us that it was in Antioch at this moment, at this juncture of history, that the Christians were called Christians in the first place. Right up until this point, they were Nazarenes. They were understood by the other Jews as some rebel group. But it is in Antioch that they are named with the Greek name Christiani, followers of Christos. Christos being the translation of Messiah. And then subsequently, every other nation adopts the name Christian as the epithet of their faith and belief. As I started off with a quote, that the hand of the Lord was with them, and a great number, believing, turned to the Lord. See how all this connects? We had a persecution, we had trouble, we had drama, but something good comes of it. You have a dispersion of population, people moving around, but taking the message with them to people who needed to hear the message. And there was, in some quarters, the idea that we should keep it for some people, and in other quarters, which is what prevailed in Christianity ultimately, that this should be a message shared to all, of all backgrounds and all ethnicities. And that's when we get named Christian. When we became an international faith, and not just of one culture, but of all cultures, that is when we adopted the name, or were actually given the name by other people, non-Christians. We were given the name Christian, and we adopted the name Christian as probably, and is the best possible way to describe who we are and what we are. Christiani. And despite the persecution, despite the difficulties, despite the tug of war of cultures, what we have is, because the message is shared to all languages, we've moved from Hebrew, Aramaic, to Greek, and Greek is pretty much the mother tongue of Christianity, in that the message itself, the gospel itself, was written originally in Greek. I was reading an article last week which explored the question, well, hold on a second. Is there a maybe here that maybe The gospel was originally written in Aramaic, which we know from the gospel was what Jesus was speaking, because every time he spoke in what is described as Hebrew in the gospel, linguists can look at that and say, well, that's not Hebrew, that's Aramaic, which is very close to Hebrew. But in any case, the point is that, was that the original language of the gospel? Well, Jesus spoke in Aramaic, and arguably he knew a little bit of Greek as well, which explains how he was able to converse in an elementary fashion with Pontius Pilate, the governor. That dialogue is recorded in Greek. And as I said, from Greek, we then have translations. The first translations of the gospel are into Syriac, Armenian, Georgian, and then Latin, in that order. And then multiple languages a few hundred years after that. Point is that the hand of the Lord is with the apostles. The hand of the Lord is with the mission if we share the mission, and that we share what we have experienced. You can't share the mission if you don't experience it first. How can you possibly go out there and either speak or act or do something in the community if you're not inspired by the message in the first place? All these things are sequential. One is a consequence of the other. And so all these beautiful blessings that we read from today's passage have to do with following the mission, the apostoli of the church and the gospel. Why then, the next question is this, and I'm going to go to the letter of Diognetus. Give me a moment. And you can all look it up for yourselves on the internet because it's a big letter. I'll only quote part of it. And this is now the late 100s AD. This is the letter to Diognetus. Christians are indistinguishable from other people, either by nationality, language, or customs. They do not inhabit separate cities of their own, or speak a foreign dialect, or follow some foreign way of life. Their teaching is not based upon revelries inspired by the curiosity of men. That's a reference to paganism. Unlike some other people, they champion no purely human doctrine. With regard to dress, food, and manner of life in general, they follow the customs of whatever city they happen to be living in, whether it is Greek or foreign. Well, this is extremely interesting. And it is a picture of us 2,000 years down the track, but was the case back then as well. The Christians just match the society they live in. We don't dress differently. Look at you, you dress like other people in Australia. In other countries, similar story. Food-wise, manner of life, we're just part of the society. But in terms of our beliefs, that's what separates us from the rest of our given societies. The letter continues, and yet there is something extraordinary about their lives. They live in their own countries as though they were only passing through. The Greek is parikundes, and we've mentioned this before, which is where we get parishioners from. Parikundes, meaning this isn't our permanent home. This life is not our permanent home, and we consider ourselves to just be passers through, pilgrims through this life. They play their full role as citizens, polites, but labour under all the disabilities of foreigners, Now this is getting interesting. They do the right thing in terms of citizenship, but labour under all the disabilities of being foreigners, considered foreigners, even though they were born and bred in that country, whether this was the Roman Empire, Greece, the Persian realm, and so on. Any country can be their homeland, but for them, their homeland, wherever it may be, is a foreign country. Like others, they marry and have children, but they do not expose them. In other words, they are protective of their children. Why? Because the culture around them, the Greco-Roman culture, this is what it means by exposing them, was very sexualized. And so the Christians were very careful to shield their children from the general culture. They live in the flesh, but they are not governed by the desires of the flesh. They pass their days upon earth, but they are citizens of heaven. Obedient to the laws, yet they live on a level that transcends the law. Christians love all people, but all people persecute them. Condemned because they are not understood. They are put to death, but raised to life again. They live in poverty, but enrich many. They are totally destitute, but possess an abundance of everything. They suffer dishonor, but that is their glory. They are defamed, but they are vindicated. A blessing is their answer to abuse. Deference, their response to insult. For the good they do, they receive the punishment of criminals. But even then, they rejoice as though receiving the gift of life. They are attacked by the Jews as aliens, foreigners. They are persecuted by the Greeks. That means all the non-Jews, Greek. For Jewish writers, when they say Greek, they mean anyone not Jewish. Gentile. Greek is equivalent to Gentile in this context. So they are persecuted by every other nation, yet no one can explain the reason for this hatred. We may say that the Christian is to the world what the soul is to the body. As the soul is present in every part of the body while remaining distinct from it, so Christians are found in all the cities of the world, but cannot be identified with the world. As the visible body contains the invisible soul, so Christians are living in the world, but their religious life remains unseen. The body hates the soul and wars against it, not because of any injury the soul has done, but because of the restriction the soul places on its pleasures. Similarly, the world hates the Christians, not because they have done to it any wrong, but because they are opposed to its pleasures and enjoyments. This is the 2nd century AD, speaking like it is today. Each and every one of you can look up on the internet the letter to Diognetus, 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 and read the whole thing. It is very instructive, it's powerful, and very meaningful, and very consistent with the message of Scripture. Enough said. An interesting historical journey for all of us today, but just know that if you share the gospel of Jesus Christ to others, the hand of the Lord will be with you. Amen.